Hello everyone, welcome to another video. Today I'll be showing you how to read airport charts from all around the world, from any airport that you may need to fly a commercial route. Just a fair warning, this will be using Jeppesen charts. Any other charts, for example aeronautical information publication charts from a national authority, will have slightly different formatting, but all the information is there and it is around the same. All the differences you will see are in formatting. With that said, let's get into the video. Okay, and here we have the chart itself. Now, what I will first do is explain how Jeppesen charts are formatted. Then I will go into the plain view of LUA and all the charts that LUA International Airport has of Malta. And then I will move on to a more complex airport, Heathrow Airport, to show that it's the exact same thing. So, I'll first start. Over here we have the heading section, so this is pretty much just general information. Here we have the communication section, frequencies that the pilot may need to contact, and here we have the plain view, which I will come to in a second. But first, I need to explain the heading and the communication section, which all Jeppesen charts have. Over here we have the ICAO and IATA code of Lima Mike Mike Lima, or MLA, Mike Lima Alpha. We have the airport elevation, 297 feet above sea level. And here we have the latitude and longitude coordinates given from the ARP, which is something I will come to when I start explaining the plane view. Pretty much, it's where the heart of the airport is and where it's given. It's usually try to be between or on a runway. Over here we have the Jeppesen logo, and over here we have the issuing date. Now, sometimes to the right of this, which is the chart number, is the effective date. What the effective date does is it says when the chart becomes actually effective, because a chart may be published early but becomes effective at a later date. In this case, there's no effective date, so the chart becomes active, it becomes correct on the 24th of January 2025. Here we have the chart number given to us here, as some other charts will tell you to refer to a different chart to read extra information. And here we have Malta Lua. What it is, it's city, country, and the airport name. Now here it's a bit confusing, but when we go to the Heathrow chart, you will see that over here it's London, UK, Heathrow. But over here it's just Malta Lua, because here city is entered as Malta, country is Malta, and the airport name is Lua. Over here we have the communication section, and I will start with ATIS. What ATIS is the Automated Terminal Information Service. Pretty much it's what pilots use to get information about what runway is active, wind, any possible things they might need for their flight, for example QNH, which is air pressure, etc. And the rest are just the other frequencies, so LUA ground, where they will contact the ground to get clearance to taxi. LUA clearance, which is also, if you might notice, is the ground frequency, so pilots will just contact ground to get their clearance. And tower, which is the tower frequency, which is what pilots will contact for takeoff clearance. Now, with that said, let's head over to the plane view section of the airport chart. Okay, and now we have arrived to the part where I explain the airport chart itself. Here we have already covered the header and communication section, and so here I need to explain the plane view part of the chart. At the sides and at the top, you will see the coordinates for latitude and longitude. On the sides, that is the north, and over here it's the east on the bottom. Now, this over here, it's the magnetic variation. What it tells you is how far from magnetic north true north is from here. So for example, from here, magnetic north is 3 degrees east from true north. Here we have the legend. It's self-explanatory. It's a legend showing you what different symbols are. It doesn't explain every symbol because some symbols are universal. Over here you have a scale, a simple scale over here, used to measure distances on this chart to show, in reality, how much, for example, 5 centimeters on a chart would be. Now, some basic runway information. Over here, you have a runway 31. Here it tells you the heading, which is 312 degrees. Here it tells you elevation. Here it tells you the length of the runway. And over here, it shows the lights over here. Same for runway 13 and 23 and 05. Over here, you have a symbol for the windsock, which shows you where the windsock will be in the real airport. All of these letters over here symbolize which taxiways they are. So, for example, this is taxiway Charlie, this is taxiway Delta. Over here, you have taxiway Oscar, taxiway Lima coming down here. So, ATC can direct you to taxi down a specific taxiway. All of these HSs stand for hotspots. Those are where pilots may make mistakes. They may not make mistakes, but they are hotspots where pilots are known to make mistakes. Not fatal mistakes, but for example, they turn down the wrong taxiway, etc. Which is why they are written in the airport info, hotspots, takeoff minimums for more information over here. And some other symbols. Over here you have the RVR. It's the runway visual range. Pretty much it's something ATC uses to sort of gauge what visibility is on the airport. They are measuring equipment used by ATC to make sure that visibility is enough for a safe takeoff for all of the aircraft. Over here you have AIS, the Aeronautical Information Services. What they do, they publish NOTAMs, AIPs, etc. And pretty much it's the governing board of the country for aviation. What MET is over here, that's the Meteorological Office. It's where they measure all of the weather-related things, for example, like wind and forecasts, etc., to be released to the pilots. Now, over here we have these little symbols here. This stands for a holding point, so where pilots need to hold. For example, let's say ATC tells you to hold at Charlie. You hold right around here. These X's are closed taxiways that are there but are closed. This stands for a helicopter, takeoff point or landing point, the H. And the ARP is sort of where the heart of the airport is, where the latitude and longitude coordinates given on the side over here are taken from. That is it for this chart over here. I will see you on the next chart, which is, we're going to take a more detailed look at apron 8 and 9. I will see you there. Okay, so here we have apron 8 and apron 9, these two charts. These are just a sort of zoomed in view of that specific area that we saw on the previous chart. So over here, we can see just the coordinates of every single stand at an apron. So for example, apron 9, you will see the stand over here, that all the coordinates, if you want to enter your INS coordinates inside of your aircraft. With INS being the inertial navigation system, pretty much without using GPS, where your plane sort of feels it is. It feels the acceleration and sort of tracks where it is. Over here I have the legend. Again, it's simple. Here is the construction area. And we have some hotspots that you can see on the takeoff minimums page, which we are going to see next. Here, if we zoom into apron 9, we can see that there is taxiway Victor, taxiway Whiskey, taxiway Tango, etc. And you here have the terminal, AIS, MET over here. You just have a zoomed in view. This is used to find a specific stand, because on the previous chart, you could not see the specific stands that you had at the airport. Now, that is all for this chart. I will meet you on the next chart, which is the takeoff minimums, hotspots, etc. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the next chart, the airport info chart and the takeoff minimums chart. We will start with the additional runway information over here, and we will read the additional information for 05 and 23. First, we have the equipment. There are hurls, high intensity runway lighting, and spaced 58 meters over here. Centerline lighting, 29 meters spacing between each one of them, and the one to indicate that they are LED lights. High ALS, high intensity approach lighting system. We know that they are LED lights and that they extend 180 meters off from the runway. These are the lights at the end of the runway. Rail, the runway end identifier lights, they are the lights at the end of the runway. They are LED lights. And the poppy lights, the precision approach path indicator lights on the left side of the runway. Here you can see what angle they are, and the MEHT, the minimum eye height over threshold, which is 67 feet. Pretty much it's how high your plane will be over the threshold, assuming you flew an exact and correct 3-degree flight path according to the poppy lights. The threshold is blank, meaning there is not a displaced threshold, meaning you can land exactly on the threshold. These are usable lengths for landing beyond the threshold and the glide slope. There is nothing in the threshold, as there is not a displaced threshold, and nothing on the glide slope, because a glide slope needs an ILS system, and since runway 05 and 23 do not have an ILS system, they do not have a glide slope. You have the takeoff run, which I will get to in a moment, and the width of the runway, 148 feet, 45 meters. You have the takeoff run available from different positions. So for example, from the runway head, you have 7,785 feet for a aircraft code C or Charlie, which is about 115 to 160 knots approach speed. These would be your usual 737s, A320s. And for aircraft code A and B, which are lighter aircraft, is this one over here, 7,070 feet. And same for runway 23. That was for runway 05. Same for runway 23. From the runway head, you have 7,785. From the taxiway Romeo, 5,584. And this keeps going as such. Same thing for runway 13 and 31. You have, but this time it is switched. Correction, they are split. Here you have hurls. Both have hurls, 60 meter spacing, as the same, both of them. LED lights, center line lights, 30 meter spacing. High ALs. But this time these are different, because runway 13 has 810 meter long high ALs, high intensity approach lighting system, while runway 31 has 900 meters of high ALs. The poppy lights on both are the same, which are both LED lights, and they have a 3-degree angle with a minimum height over threshold of 58 feet. So that's how high our plane will be. As you can see, very similar to everything that was up here. And they have RVR, runway visual range equipment, used to measure visibility on the runway. Here you have nothing over threshold, because there is not a displaced threshold to land on. And over here you have the landing beyond the glide slope. Since runway 13 and 31 has an ILS system, assuming you follow the glide slope perfectly, you have 10,020 feet of runway to land after the touchdown point on the glide slope. Takeoff run out, it says down here, very similar to the one over here, up here, and you have a width of 190 feet. We will now continue down to the hotspots area. And these are just sort of markings of hotspots where pilots may make mistakes, may make errors. For example, hotspot 1, there's a confusing taxiway and runway crossing, so pilots can be a bit careful around those areas. Now all of these hotspots are very similar. And now we can finally go down to the takeoff minimums. Now, we will start from here. So adequate visual reference, that means that all you need is just adequate visibility. For day, you have either an RVR or a visibility of 500 meters. So to take off with just adequate visual reference, you need to be day and either have an RVR or just a normal visibility of 500 meters given from the meteorological office, because RVR on the runway might be a bit different from the actual visibility, so 500 meters or more. You cannot have an adequate visual reference takeoff without on at night. Now, it shows that for 400 meters, if you have 400 meters, you have to have either runway lightings or centerline lightings at night, or during the day you need to have runway centerline markings or runway centerline lightings or runway lightings or centerline lightings. These are or. You need to have either or runway lightings or centerline lightings if you only have 400 meters visibility. Over here, once you have RVR, not only visual, you'd have RVR 250 meters, you need to have low visibility procedures required, and you need to have approval for the takeoff. Over here, if you have runway centerline markings, runway lighting, and centerline lightings, and proper RVR, you can take off even if it's day and night. If it's day, you have to have runway centerline markings, runway lightings, and RVR, and if it's night, runway centerline markings and RVR, and you have to have runway lightings or centerline lighting. That's it for the takeoff minimums. Pretty much what it is if you have low visibility, let's say you have 500 meter visibility, or more, you have adequate visual reference. You don't really need that much. You don't really need anything else. But if visibility keeps deteriorating down to a minimum of 350 meters, you need to have all of this depending for what time of day it is, etc. So now we will go on to the departure chart at Malta. Okay, and now we have arrived to the standard instrument departure chart, or also known as the SID chart. Something to note over here, because this is the first chart we've encountered with this. Here you have the issuing date and the effective date. I've explained this before, but this is actually how it looks like. The effective date is when it becomes effective, 30th November, while the issuing date is when it was actually issued, 24th November. Now with that out of the way, let us start with the chart. Communication section is the same, showing only the relevant communications, with Lua Tower and Lua Radar, and airport elevation down here. Here you have some instructions that are important for pilots to know. First of all is the transition altitude. It's where the pilot is the altitude. The pilots will transition from the local QNH, the local barometer setting, to the standard barometer setting. Now what the barometer setting does is the plane, it measures its altitude from the barometer from air pressure. It can tell how high or low it is from air pressure. But since air pressure varies from place to place and from day to day because of weather conditions, pilots have to set their QNH every time before they fly. So 5,000 feet is when the pilot will change from the standard barometer pressure to the, from the local barometer pressure to the standard barometer pressure. Now, some other instructions. The pilot will remain on tower frequency until passing 2,000 feet, then they will contact Lua Radar. This is expected of the pilot, so a actual tower doesn't need to actually inform them, usually. Secondly, if the pilot is unable to conform to the published altitude restrictions, which we will see below, they must inform ATC prior to departure. Thirdly, no speed restrictions are unless otherwise instructed by ATC, so the pilots can fly at whatever speed they want unless instructed by ATC otherwise. And fourth, the standard instrument departures over here include noise abatement procedures and routings. So they are made to sort of limit noise as much as possible. They should be strictly adhered to within the limit of aircraft performance. Over here we have the departures listed, so goes with 3 Alpha, 3 Bravo, 3 Charlie, and 3 Delta. There are other departures, which we are not seeing here, but this is just the Gozo departure, which is the usual one, flying north towards places like Milan, Heathrow, Frankfurt, etc. And this accounts for all runways. Coming down to the plane view section, we are going to see a lot of things. We'll start off by seeing these. These are the VOR. So this is the Gozo VOR over here, which is 115.7, the frequency. And it is, its identifier is GZO. So you will see GZO on your MFDs if you are going to tune to the frequency. Now these two over here are ILS station, which are normally used for approaches. They have their uses here, because over here, as you can see, at the DME5 LQ, which is this one, you have to start turning towards the Gozo VOR, and you have to be over 2,500 feet. Now, what this means is that the bottom line is that you have to be at least 2,500 feet by this point. So 8 nautical miles away from the southern ILS at runway 31. At least 2,500 feet. If it's a sandwich, so there's a line above, which we will see in Heathrow, there has to be, you have to be at that specific altitude at that time. And if it's just a line above, you have to be below that altitude at that time. Now here we can just see the normal routings. Now this red or brown circle over here, the ARP, this stands for the minimum safe altitude, which is 2,000 feet down here. Pretty much it stands for the minimum altitude that you will be safe from any obstacles on the ground in a radius of the ARP of the airport, which we have discussed before. The ARP is centered not on the VOR, but usually sort of the heart of the airport where there are the runways. We will come down here and we will look at the bottom part. Initial climb clearance is 5,000 feet. So if ATC does not tell you anything, don't climb to your cruising altitude. You have to climb to 5,000 feet. Then after you're done with the departure, you may climb to your altitude directed by ATC. But if ATC gives you another altitude, such as 7,000, you have to climb to that altitude. And over here, we have the instructions to follow the departure. Now here they are shown as well, but here they are laid out in text. So for example, for the Gozo 3 Bravo departure out of runway 13, which is coming southwards this way, you have to go to 1.6 nautical miles of this one over here, the ILS at the ILS at 13, correction. Then you have to turn right to 235, and then when you're passing the 145 radial of the Gozo VOR, you're gonna turn towards it, turn right, and intercept the Gozo radial 155. Here it doesn't include altitude restrictions. You are expected to look at them on the actual plane view chart, but here they are just laid out in text format over here. So that's it for the departure chart. I will see you at the approach chart, because Malta International Airport does not have a standard arrival chart. So I will see you at the approach chart next. Okay, now we are on to the approach chart. Now this may seem intimidating or daunting, because there are so many symbols, so many different abbreviations, but I will explain everything. The header and communication section is all the same as previous chart, so I will not explain them. But below it is the localizer, the ILS frequency chart with the localizer and the name of it. So the frequency is 110.5, as you can see here, and its name is Lima Mike. Same for down here, you can see 110.5 Lima Mike. If you tune it, you will be able to follow the glide slope. You have to tune this frequency, and then you'll be able to follow the glide slope and localizer. Now, the difference between localizer and glide slope is that the localizer acts as a sort of horizontal guide, telling you, listen, be on this line. So if you're too far left, it'll tell you, okay, go right. If you're too far right, it'll tell you go left. While the glide slope is the same thing, but for vertically. It tells you at a given distance how high or low you need to go. Here you have the final approach course, the heading you have to be on final. And here you have the glide slope. You have two numbers. That's because one of them is QNH and QFE. I'll explain QFE later and QNH later. This is the at 4 nautical miles away from the runway. Here you have the decision altitude or height, 431 feet or 200 feet, QFE. This is not usually up here. It's usually down here, as it also is down here. But especially in cases where there are Cat 2 and Cat 3 landings, Category 2 and Category 3 landings, for example, stormy and foggy weather, it is usually below. And here you have the airport elevation and the runway elevation. This is where QFE ties in. QFE is basing your altitude off of the runway elevation, off where you're going to land. So if you're taking off, you will just simply set the QFE to, you would cycle your QNH or QFE until your barometer setting, until it reads 0. But if you're in the air, it's a bit harder to do. So what you would do is you would use this runway elevation over here, 8 hectopascals, to go to reduce your actual QNH by 8 hectopascals. So now you can base your altitude off of the runway. Why you would do this is to know how high you are relative to the runway, which is very useful, not having to use 431 but just 200. So for example, if in Malta the air pressure is 1020 hectopascals, you would simply set it as 1012 hectopascals, as it is 8 hectopascals less than 1020. I hope that makes sense. Over here you have the terminal arrival area, 25 nautical miles of the initial approach fix. Pretty much what the terminal arrival area is something for RNAV arrivals, for not GPS per se, but guided arrivals, where you this is for terrain avoidance. So it will guarantee you an area of 25 nautical miles in this sector with 1,000 feet of terrain avoidance following this altitude. So there are 3 IAFs on this arrival, one at Kekor, one at Tivor, and one at Sofor. You can see IAF above them. Let's look at the Sofor one. There's 1,500 feet inside of the semicircle, indicating that if you can descend to 1,500 feet, and you will have a minimum of 1,000 feet of separation from any obstacles on the ground. Now, these TAAs are made, they're part of the procedure. So you may descend to their altitude, to this minimum altitude of 1,500 feet, whenever you want, without ATC clearance. But in this case, you wouldn't, because you need to be at Sofor at 3,000 feet, and Tivor at 3,000 feet. Now, these stretch out for 25 nautical miles, and they cover only a sector. They don't cover 25 nautical miles around Kekor. They cover this sort of sector around Kekor, as is shown over here. Over here, you have the missed approach procedures. You will climb on track 312 degrees to 3,000 feet. Then you will continue as directed. It is also written down here, straight ahead 3,000 feet on 312 degrees. But if you have lost communications, you will climb on track 312 degrees to this waypoint. Then you will turn left direct to Tivor at 3,000 feet, as shown in the chart. Here we have altitude setting hectopascals. It tells you that in this area of the world, they use hectopascals instead of inches per inches. Here you have the runway elevation for the QFE. I've already explained this. And here you have this transition level and transition altitude. What the transition level is that as you're descending, it is the flight level that you will change from the standard to the local QNH or the local QFE. Traditional altitude is the opposite. As you're climbing, it is the altitude you will change from the local to the standard, 101.3.25. Now, coming down here to the plane view part. Here, it looks daunting with a lot of symbols, but it's not that bad. Here we have the ILS DME with all of the information you need. Over here you have the holding points, the initial approach fixes, the IAFs have holding points in this case, and they are 6 nautical miles. You cannot exceed 230 knots, and the minimum holding altitude is 3,000 feet. So you have to be at 3,000 feet while holding. So you would use these if per se you are a bit too high, let's say 20,000 feet, that's an exaggeration. You'd hold over here until you're down to 3,000 feet. So then you can continue. These numbers between represent the distance between each waypoint. So between Kekor and Rulov, there's 3 nautical miles. And between Rulov and Sudox, 5 nautical miles. This is the heading, the 222 degrees. The heading, you have to go to them. Sudox is known as the intermediate fix. It is the fix where pretty much you will turn into final. That's all for the plane view. Over here, you have the recommended altitudes. If the glide slope goes out, you will cross-reference your sort of descent with these. So at 8 nautical miles, you should be 2,834, 7, 2,516, at 6 nautical miles, 2,197, etc., etc., etc. Over here you have sort of a 2D view from the side of the glide slope. So you start off at Sudox at 13.5 nautical miles away from the runway, at 3,000 feet on heading 312 degrees. You will start your descent onto glide slope at Sukal 8.5 nautical miles from the runway threshold. You'll continue descending. At 4 nautical miles, you should be at 1,561. Now these are all based off of sea level, not based off of QFE. And then you will continue descending, etc. Down here, you have your ground speed and how fast you need to descend depending on your ground speed. So if you're 120 knots ground speed, you have to descend at 637 feet per minute. 140, 743 feet per minute. And it just goes on and on. Here it shows you what runway lightings there are, high ILs and PAPI lights. Not only those, if you want to see everything, you should go back to the takeoff minimums page and the airport information page. And over here we have something similar to the takeoff minimums. Pretty much this is telling you what your minimum decision altitude or your the minimum descent altitude or your decision altitude. The difference between them is that this decision altitude is for precision approaches where you have glide slope. The minimum descent altitude is your minimum descent altitude when you do not have a precision approach. So, over here on the left side, you have the decision altitude or height. Same thing up here. The same thing up here. Usually this will be split up into category 1, 2, and 3, and you will see that at the Heathrow airport. And below it are the RVR minimums to have a safe landing. For ALS out, for having your approach lighting systems out, and with them. So if you have approach lighting systems, your RVR is 550 meters, correction. And if your ALS is out, your RVR is 1,200 meters. This is given to you by ATC. Now with the only localizer, so glide slope out, your decision altitude or minimum descent altitude or height is 650 feet or 419 meters. What the difference is that pretty much the minimum descent altitude, you can stay at that altitude, but you cannot descend below it if you do not have visual on the runway. So let's say I descend, then I hit the descent altitude, I can hold at that altitude until I see the runway, and then I can choose if I have passed the missed approach point or if I can continue the landing. The decision altitude is when you have to decide, listen, either I'm going around or I am going to land. But minimum descent altitude is not that. Now, for glide slope out, you have to have a minimum RVR of 1,200 meters and RVR of 1,900 meters if the ALS is out. Now, the RVR is 750 meters for the first case if you have a glide slope, if a flight director or autopilot is not used. And you may choose decision altitude if you're using a VNAV approach, so some planes have a vertical navigation, instead of the minimum descent altitude. It depends on which airline or which operator you're operating on. So that is it for the approach chart. I will see you on the next chart at Heathrow. Okay, here we are at the top of the Heathrow chart. We have finally arrived to the Heathrow chart, and this is the airport chart. But first, I am going to cover again the header and communications part of the chart. So as you can see here, it's the ICAO and IATA code, Echo Golf Lima Lima and Lima Hotel Romeo, with the airport elevation 83 feet. Here is the airport location, latitude and longitude. This is the ARP location, with the Jeppesen logo over here, and the issuing date being 31st May 2024, and the effective date being June 13th. Things we have already seen before up to now. As you can see, city, country, and the name of the airport. And coming on to the communication, there are some things we have not seen before. First of all, when there's a star and an asterisk next to a frequency, that means that the frequency operates part-time. It doesn't operate all the time during the day. And over here we have Heathrow delivery. Before in Malta, it was just Heathrow, it was ground. But here we have an actual dedicated delivery frequency to accept flight plans and actually verify them. This operates part-time and it offers clearance, pre-taxi clearance. Now ground, same thing, it operates part-time, but there are multiple frequencies. This is to distribute the workload. So one air traffic controller does not need to cover multiple aprons, because it can get overwhelming, considering that Heathrow is one of the largest and busiest airports in the world. And tower, same thing, they distribute the workload over 2 tower frequencies, but tower operates all the time. So, with that said, I will head over to the actual ground chart. It is more of the same. I'm just going to show you that everywhere in the world the Jeppesen charts are standardized and they are the same. There are no real differences over here apart from the size of the airport. Okay, here we are on the ground chart, and I am just showing this to you to show you that there is no real difference between the Malta chart and the Heathrow chart. So one of the world's busiest airports, no real difference between them. The only main difference is that over here there appears to be a category 2 or 3 hold line, while over here this is a normal hold line, this is a category 2 or 3 hold line, which are made for category 2 and 3 conditions, so for stormy and foggy weather where visibility is low. It is farther back than the normal hold line, so that aircraft cannot interfere with the sensitive ILS equipment. Here is the ARP, and over here you can see some RVR, runway visual ranging equipment, that appears. You can see a windsock, and you can see the length of the runway. It's pretty much the exact same. If you can read the first chart, you can read the second one. So, with that said, let us go over to a more zoomed in view of the parking stands at Heathrow Airport. Okay, here we are on the parking stand chart, the apron chart, and this remains the same as the Malta chart. So as you can see here, you can see each individual taxiway here, for example, taxiway Alpha, taxiway Delta. You can see the category 2 or 3 holding point over here. You can see over here, there's something a bit new. This is where the apron ends, so where apron control ends and you go on actual sort of taxiways that are not part of the apron. But everything is labeled quite clearly. Everything is quite similar to the Malta chart. You can see each individual stand. Over here, you can see each individual pier of every individual terminal. For example, here at Pier 5, there is stand 330. It remains quite similar. And if we come down, we can see the cargo terminals, everything. You can see each individual hotspot as well. So that's it for the parking stand chart. I will now go over to the airport info and takeoff minimums chart. Okay, and here we are on the additional runway information, the additional airport information, and the takeoff minimums chart. Here we're going to have some additional runway information that is going to be useful for our flight. First of all, over here, we're going to start off with the runway 09 left, 27 right. And here we can see the equipment the runway has. It has hurdle equipment, high intensity runway lighting equipment every 60 meters, with centerline lighting every 15 meters CL. It has high altitude, high intensity approach lighting system, which conforms to category 2 standards, which is pretty much foggy weather. And it has touchdown zone lighting and puppy lights 3 degrees to the left of the runway. It has RVR equipment, runway visual ranging equipment as well. Now, over here we have a landing beyond. These could be different for airports because there might be a displaced threshold, which is pretty much an area where landings are unsafe due to things, for example, like terrain. For example, there could be a hill, but where planes can taxi on and can sometimes even take off from. So you cannot land on a displaced threshold, but you can taxi on a displaced threshold. Over here, for runway 09 left, we have 11,785 feet, with runway 27 right having a landing distance available of 12,736 feet. Now, following the glide slope, runway 09 left will have 10,813 feet, while 27 right will have 11,642 feet, following the glide slope to a T, touching down exactly on the touchdown zone. Now, takeoff run available. Down here it's self-explanatory. So, for example, from the runway head, you would have 12,799 feet on runway 09 left, and on runway 27 right, 12,736 feet. While from other intersections like Alpha 5, you'd have 10,289 feet. Quite self-explanatory. The width of runway 09 left, 27 right is 164 feet or 50 meters. Now, this one over here indicates that 09 left and 27 right is a grooved runway, which is useful to wick away moisture in rainy conditions, and just to improve grip in general. This is the same thing for runway 09 right and 27 left. So I will skip this part as it is pretty much the exact same thing as above. Down here we have the hotspots. These are hotspots where pilots may make mistakes, may take a wrong turn, and they are quite important for pilots to know about them. So pretty much on hotspots 1 and 2, their pilots are to maintain a good lookout at all times and are responsible for wingtip clearance, not to collide with other aircraft. These are information only and not as ATC instructions. Now down below, this is something we have not seen yet. When reported RVR is below 400 meters, a plane is not allowed to start up until the reported RVR is equal to or greater than the appropriate value as shown below. So different aircraft will have different RVR takeoff minimums. So a plane with a minimum of 350 meters of RVR can start up at 300 RVR. This is so a plane does not wait at the threshold for a long time, does not wait next to the runway for a long time, waiting for visibility to clear up. So a plane with 200 meters of minimum RVR can start up at 150 meters. And down here we have the actual takeoff minimums. So during the day, with adequate visual reference, a plane needs to have at least 500 meters of visual RVR to take off. not RVR by force, just the meteorological office. By the meteorological office, they have to have a visual of 500 meters minimum. During the day, with runway lightings or runway centerline lightings, and at night, runway lightings or centerline lightings, they have to have at least 400 meters visual range. Now, coming down lower, a plane needs to have a RVR. The RVR needs to be operational. So, during the day, with runway lightings and runway centerline markings, and during the night, runway lightings or centerline lightings, a plane needs to have a minimum of 200 meters RVR. During the day and night, with runway lightings and centerline lightings, a RVR needs to be 200 meters for a plane to take off, for both Class C and D aircraft, Charlie and Delta aircraft, or category Charlie and Delta aircraft, and with runway lightings, centerline lightings, and relevant RVR, a plane has to have a RVR of 450 meters. Now, what these mean here are the RVR locations. So there is an RVR at the touchdown zone, RVR at the middle of the runway, and the RVR at the rollout at the end. So pretty much there needs to be all three RVRs working. So middle, so the start at the beginning of the runway, the middle of the runway, and the end of the runway. All three have to be working. And with hurl, centerline lightings, and relevant RVR is minimum to 125 for a takeoff. These are low visibility takeoff procedures over here. And RVR 75 meters with approved guidance system or a heads-up display. So it can go as low as 75 meters for aircraft to take off. So these are the RVRs that are needed. These are the sort of visual ranges that are needed. And that is it for the airport information and takeoff minimums chart. Okay, here we are on our standard instrument departure chart, the SID, and here we have the max at 1 Foxtrot and max at 1 Golf departures. This chart is like the SID chart at Malta, with a few little differences and a few little additions. Here we have the same thing, communications menu, area, and the same header. Airport elevation is 83 feet, and London's control is 123.180, the frequency of London control. Your transition altitude is 6,000 feet. This is where you will transition from your local air pressure, your local QNH, to the standard 1013.25 hectopascals. And here you have some instructions. First of all, when instructed by ATC, contact London Control after takeoff. You must report your call sign, your departure designator, your current altitude, and your initial cleared altitude. So you must pretty much contact London Control, telling them, listen, I am my call sign, I am on this departure, this is my current altitude, and this is my cleared altitude by ATC. The SIDs include noise preferential routes. It's telling you to refer to another chart over here, 10-4. Cruising levels are to be issued after takeoff by London Control. You should not expect to climb. You should not climb above SID levels unless instructed by ATC. So you must maintain your standards with departure altitude, which is 6,000 feet in this case, until ATC tells you to climb. And you should expect close-in obstacles over here. Over here you have a speed restriction. You are not to pass 250 knots below flight level 100 unless authorized by ATC. And here we have arrived to the plane view chart. Now, some key things. Here you have the MSA based off of the London VOR. So the MSA is 2,100 feet for this sector, and 2,200 feet for the northwestern sector. There are some differences because perhaps up here there are some higher obstacles that require that extra 100 feet of clearance. Here we have the Burnham NDB, and we have the London VOR over here. Here you have some warnings. Do not turn below 590 feet. And due to interaction with other routes, do not climb above 6,000 until cleared by ATC. which is pretty much this one over here. So you are not to be cleared above 6,000 feet until ATC tells you do not climb, otherwise you may risk a collision with other aircraft or at least cause other aircraft to have to delay their descent or ascent due to you. And ATC will have a real headache with you. Over here at D7.7, it's telling you to be between 3,000 feet and 6,000 feet, because 3,000 feet has the bottom line, showing that you have to be above 3,000 feet, and the 6,000 feet has the top line, showing you have to be below 6,000 feet. At D9.3 from London, at 9.3 nautical miles away from London, you are to be between 6,000 and 4,000 feet, and by maxit you have to be exactly 6,000 feet, because it is sort of sandwiched in there. If you lose your communications over here, as you can see, you have to comply with the route and altitude restrictions of this departure over here. Now, something new over here, this is the climb gradient. Pretty much it tells you that due to noise abatement procedures, you must maintain a climb gradient. What a climb gradient is, it's pretty much telling you how much you have to climb for every piece of distance you travel horizontally. So if I travel 100 feet horizontally, I have to climb 4 feet vertically to maintain this 4% gradient. This is up to 4,000 feet. Now, you don't need to maintain a 4% gradient, you can maintain above 4,000 feet, 4% gradient, correction, because it says minimum climb gradient. So you have to maintain at least a 4% gradient. You have a little chart here to tell you at what speed you are, how fast you have to climb. So at 200 knots, you have to climb 810 feet per minute. If you're unable to comply with these, you have to inform Heathrow delivery prior to your pushback. And at the bottom, we have the routing. So for example, for the maxit 1 Foxtrot, you have the route in text over here. So you will go straight ahead and you will intercept the London radial 255 25 DME from London. Then you will turn left into bearing 161 from the Burnham NDB, etc, etc, etc. This is pretty much just telling you, listen, this is what's going to happen. It's what you have to do to follow the SID. Now, with that said, this SID is finished. I will see you at the standard terminal arrival chart, the star. Okay, and now we'll be examining the standard terminal arrival chart, the star. This is the LSO1 hotel arrival over here, and this is an RNAV. Pretty much it is your aircraft's ability. What RNAV is, the aircraft's ability to fly on a specific course. Over here we will see in the communications panel that there are 3 different ATIS frequencies. Now, the reason there are 3 different ATIS frequencies is to maximize coverage, because the radio waves, they cannot really reach other aircraft that far away. So Heathrow felt it a necessity to start transmitting over 3 different frequencies from 3 different locations. So there will be, for example, a VOR in the north, a VOR in the south, and one from Heathrow itself. They felt it a necessity, so to maximize coverage. To the right of it, we can see the airport elevation, 83 feet, and to the right of it, we can see the altitude setting in hectopascals. Transition level over here is set by ATC, as you can see, so that means that you'll have to tune into the ATIS, the Automated Terminal Information System, to listen out for the transition level and to know when to transition from your standard to the local QNH, to the local air pressure. This RNAV 5 here means is that your plane needs to be capable of flying an RNAV route up to a precision of 5 nautical miles. So your plane has to have a precision of maximum 5 nautical miles. Within 5 nautical miles, you need to fly the route. If it is not that precise, if it will have a deviation of, let's say, 10 nautical miles, you cannot fly this route. Here's some instructions. Standard routes may be varied by ATC, so your route. So you may not get the LSO1 hotel arrival, and aircraft may be instructed direct to a waypoint following radar vectoring. So if ATC tells you your call sign direct to Biggin or direct to Tiger, you have to go direct to Tiger. Over here you can see the routing, LSO Rotno ETVAX, and in brackets flight level 180. Tiger, this waypoint with a speed restriction, so you have to be less than 250 knots, and then the big NVOR, less than 220 knots, and have to be at flight level 070. Looking at the map, you get the same information. So at EDVAX, you have to be at flight level 180. As you can see, there's the sandwich. At Tiger, you have a possible holding point where ATC might tell you, or you might tell ATC that you wish to hold to lose altitude. Your max flight level is flight level 240, and your minimum holding altitude is flight level 150. This waypoint, you can see that there is a speed restriction of 250 knots, and by the big NVOR, which is 115.1, you have a maximum speed restriction of 220 knots, and an altitude restriction at flight level 070. Here you can see the minimum safe altitude of the ARP centered around the ARP, which is 2,300 feet. And some warnings. First, you may not go past big NVOR without ATC clearance. And here it tells you that pilots should plan for possible descent clearance as follows. Flight level 180 by EDVAX and flight level 070 by big NVOR. So pilots should plan that this is going to happen. But actual descent clearance will be as directed by ATC, so ATC might tell you disregard the chart, or they might tell you just descend to this altitude. And they may make you sort of ignore these warnings over here. Anyways, that's it for the STAR, for the standard terminal arrival chart. I will see you on the approach chart where we will look at the ILS for runway 27 right. Okay, here we are on the approach chart. This is the runway 27 right approach, the ILS approach for runway 27 right at London Heathrow. This is just like any other chart, and we will start from top to bottom. At the top we have the header, and right below it we have the communication section with all relevant communications. The star over here shows that it is part-time and doesn't operate all the time, that it may be down at certain times. The digital ATIS has 3 frequencies, as explained before. They are transmitted from different VORs. One of them is transmitted from the Heathrow airport itself, one of them from a VOR, and the other 2 are from VORs not at Heathrow airport. Heathrow Director, which is pretty much as well Heathrow Approach, is what directs you to final, while Heathrow Tower actually gives you landing and clearance. 2 frequencies to split the workload for Heathrow Tower. And Heathrow Ground over here, all of these are likely for different aprons, because many large airports have different ground frequencies for different aprons, and to split the workload as well. Below the digital ATIS, you will find the localizer frequency and the identifier, which is India Romeo Romeo. The frequency is 110.3, and the star over here, the asterisk, shows you that this is a part-time frequency that does not operate all the time. What the localizer does, the localizer is horizontal guidance, while the glide slope is vertical guidance. So it tells you if you need to go to the left or to the right, while the glide slope tells you if you need to go up or down. Here you have the final approach course, 269, so this is the heading you should be on final approach. Over here, we have the altitude that you should be at 7.5 nautical miles, and when you will start your descent at India Romeo Romeo on this approach. So you should be 2,500 feet sea level, or 2,422 feet QFE. Over here, QFE pretty much is the difference, is you're basing your altitude off of the runway altitude, off of where you're going to land, instead of basing it off of sea level. Here it doesn't really make that much of a difference because Heathrow Airport is very close to sea level. Over here for the different categories, it tells you to refer to minimums for your minimum altitude, unlike Malta, which just had one minimum altitude and was split over here. Here we have the airport and runway elevation here, 83 feet airport elevation, and runway is 78 feet. And up here we have something new. It shows you the minimum safe altitude for the London, based off of the London VOR. Now the minimum safe altitude, it stretches 25 nautical miles out in a circular fashion, and it tells you the altitude where you can descend to that altitude and have 1,000 feet of clearance from the ground, a minimum of 1,000 feet of clearance. So in this section over here, so going west, looking towards the London VOR 090 radial, and from the north towards 18, looking down southwards 180. Over here, the minimum safe altitude is 2,200 feet, while in the rest it is 2,100 feet based off the London VOR. It is also shown down here. Over here you have missed approach instructions. It tells you to climb straight ahead when passing 1,580 feet, or when passing over the ILS station, whichever one is later. Then it tells you to do a climbing turn right on track 316 degrees to 3,000 feet. Then continue as directed by ATT. It tells you that in the event of a radio failure, see chart 11.6. This is all repeated down here, over here. Straight ahead, 1,580 feet, and over the runway threshold, whichever one is later. Then turn right 316 degrees. Here it tells you the altitude settings, which is in hectopascals, as is most of Europe. The runway elevation, so this is how much you're going to need to change in case you want to go to QFE. So if the QNH is 1013, you must put it to 1010, and now you will be working off of QFE instead of QNH. So now you have changed your point of reference for altitude to the runway altitude instead. The transition level over here is set by ATC, and the transition altitude is 6,000 feet. The difference between them, pretty much transition level, is as you're descending and you're going to cross it, and then you have to switch to the local QNH. While transition altitude is as you're climbing and climbing, you will go from the local to the standard 1013.25 hectopascals. Coming down here to the plain view area, we will notice everything as is usual. It tells you the heading over here, the frequency, and the identifier, and that it is part-time over here. We have two NDBs where ATC may ask you to hold. The chill turn NDB over here, with the minimum holding altitude at 3,000 feet, and the EPSOM NDB over here, minimum holding altitude 3,000 feet. Coming down, you have the localizer. If you just have localizer with no glide slope, it tells you that what altitude you should be at for each distance. So at 7 nautical miles, you should be at 2,320 feet. At 6, 2,050 feet. At 5, 1,430 feet, etc, etc, etc. Continuing like that. And here you have a view from the side of the descent profile that you will need to go down. Over here you have the distance between each one of these, and over here you have altitudes for where you should be. So for example, at 3 nautical miles you should be at 1,090 feet, 1,090 feet. You will start your descent at 2,500 feet, DME 7.5, which is also 8 nautical miles, 8.8 nautical miles away from London. Over here, for each ground speed you have, it tells you what your descent should look like. So at 120 ground speed in knots, you should descend a 3-degree flight profile, a 3-degree descent, and as such that is 637 feet per minute. 140 is 743 feet per minute, 160 849 feet per minute, etc. This over here shows you what lighting there is. There is high ILS 2, high intensity approach lighting system 2, so that is high ILS but to a category 2 standard, which is lower visibility, and the poppy lights over here. And over here we have the minimums. Now this circle to land thing is new. What it is pretty much if for whatever reason you cannot follow a approach with the ILS, you can just turn in sort of to land and circle to land over here. It tells you for category C and D aircraft there are differences. Category C aircrafts are smaller aircrafts like A320, 737s, while category Ds are wide bodies like 777s. For category C, the maximum speed is 180 knots, with the minimum descent altitude or height 940 feet or 857 feet of QFE. Now what the MDA is it tells you do not descend past this if you want, unless you have a visual on the runway and you are lined up on the runway. This V over here tells you that the reading here has to be visual. So the meteorological office, pretty much whoever puts out the METARs and the ATISs, they have to have a visibility of at least 2,400 meters. While for category D, the visibility has to be 3,600 meters. This differs from RVR, as the runway conditions on the runway may be different from conditions actually in the air. And then we have the same old usual. For localizer or glide slope out, your decision altitude or minimum descent altitude or height is 640 feet over here, or 562 feet in QFE. If the approach lighting system is out, you have to have an RVR minimum of 2,400 feet, and if it is there, a minimum 1,900 feet. For a category 1 landing, so with decent visibility, your decision altitude or height is 278 feet or 200 feet QFE. With the ALS out, you have to have a minimum visibility of RVR 1,200 feet, and the touchdown zone or central landing out 550 feet, but with a sort of thing over here. It tells you that the RVR is 750 feet when a flight director, autopilot, or HUD to descent altitude, correction to decision altitude, is not used. If these are here, the RVR remains 550 feet, always. Category 2 landings, which are a bit lower visibility, this is radio altitude, RA, radio altitude. Radio altitude 102 feet, because the altitude may differ, as there may be a, for example, ditch in front of the runway or some things like that. The decision altitude or height is 178 feet or 100 feet. What the radio altitude is pretty much the aircraft using its radar, the radio altitude correction, is the aircraft using its radar to sort of scan the ground and see how high it is off the ground. The RVR for a category 2 is 300 feet. Usually this is used for with autoland. And the category D, so category D aircraft without autoland, is RVR 350 meters. For a category 3A, which is a category 3, which is still low visibility but still a bit of visibility, your decision height, this is decision height now, not decision altitude, is 50 feet, and RVR 200 meters. You may not land if it is lower than 200 meters. And the category 3B does not have a decision altitude or decision height. You can land whenever you want, and you may abort whenever you feel necessary. And your RVR has to be a minimum of 75 feet. That is it for the ILS DME for the approach chart. That is it. That is it for the video. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you found it interesting. I know these charts may seem daunting when looking at them, but they are very important. They are a very important part of becoming a pilot and to navigate such airports, to help ATC and yourself to navigate an airport, both when you're flying, both when you're departing, both when you're approaching and landing the airport, and when you're actually sort of navigating and taxiing in the airport on the ground. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Thank you very much. Have a good day.